The day my father's will was read, my sister became $50 million richer. I got nothing. Not the lake house in Vermont. Not the Manhattan condo. Not even the watch he used to wear every Sunday morning when we had breakfast at the diner on Maple Street. Just nothing. The lawyer cleared his throat and slid the final page across the polished mahogany table like it was a restaurant check no one wanted to pick up. My sister Emily smiled. I remember that smile more clearly than the numbers. $50 million. You'd think a number that big would feel unreal. But it didn't. It sat in the room like a heavy piece of furniture nobody could move. The reading happened in a quiet office on the 23rd floor of a glass building in Midtown Manhattan. The windows looked out over the river. It was one of those gray afternoons where the sky and water blur together. Emily wore black. Designer black. The kind that probably cost more than my first car. I wore the same navy blazer I'd had for 8 years. Across the table sat Mr. Halvorson, my father's estate attorney. White hair. Calm voice. The kind of man who charged $600 an hour to say things slowly. He looked uncomfortable. That should have been my first clue. Emily leaned back in her chair like someone watching the final seconds of a basketball game she already knew she and Oppos. D1. Go ahead, she said. Finish. Mr. Halvorson adjusted his glasses. Per the instructions of the late Richard Calloway. That was my father. Richard Calloway. Real estate developer. Worth somewhere north of $70 million by the time he died. At least that's what the papers said. The majority of the estate, including controlling shares of Calloway Development Group, liquid holdings and personal assets totaling approximately $50 million, will be transferred to his daughter, Emily Calloway. Emily folded her hands and nodded slowly, like a queen acknowledging applause. I didn't say anything. The lawyer hesitated before continuing. There is an additional statement addressed to Mr. Daniel Calloway. That was me. My sister glanced over with something that looked suspiciously like amusement. Mr. Halvorson read from the page. Daniel, you are a good man, but you never understood business. You never had the instinct for it. Emily does. This is my final decision. The room went quiet. The words hung there like smoke. I waited for the rest. There wasn't any. No trust fund. No modest inheritance. No thanks for trying. Just a polite written version of you're not good enough. Emily let out a small breath through her nose. Not quite a laugh. But close. Well, she said. I guess Dad knew what he was doing. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. And I smiled. Because if there's one thing my father taught me, it's that the most dangerous moment in any negotiation is when someone thinks they and Oppos V already won. My father died on a Tuesday morning in early March. Heart attack. He was 72, stubborn, and convinced treadmills were a conspiracy created by weak people. I got the call at 6:40 a.m. Emily didn't call me. The hospital did. That told you a lot about our family. By the time I arrived, she was already there in the hallway talking quietly with a nurse. She hugged me, but it felt like hugging someone who had already moved on to the next chapter. Emily and I had always been different. She loved the spotlight. I preferred the machinery behind the curtain. When we were kids, she was the one giving presentations in school competitions. I was the one fixing the projector. When we were adults, she worked inside our father's company. Executive title. Corner office. Expensive suits. I worked elsewhere. Consulting. Quiet work. Numbers. Contracts. Not glamorous, but profitable. My father never understood it. Or maybe he just didn't respect anything he didn't control. Come work for me, he used to say. Every Christmas. Every birthday. Every family dinner. And every time I told him the same thing. I'm good where I am. Which apparently translated in his mind to not understanding business. Funny thing about fathers. Sometimes they only see the version of you they created. Not the one you became. A week after the funeral, we gathered in that Manhattan office. Emily arrived in a black Mercedes. I took the subway, which I suspect made her feel even more confident about the outcome. While we waited for the lawyer, she checked her phone every 30 seconds. When he finally started reading the will, she didn't even pretend to be surprised. Which was my second clue. After the reading ended, Emily stood and smoothed the sleeve of her coat. Well, she said casually, I guess things will be changing around here. For who? I asked. She smiled. For the company. Then she paused. And for me. Mr. Halvorsen gathered the documents carefully. There will be some administrative matters over the next few weeks, he said. Ownership transfers, board confirmations, asset filings. Emily waved a hand. Of course. She turned to me. I suppose this means you and Appos free now. Free from what? From pretending to care about Dad's business. The thing about insults is that sometimes they reveal more about the person giving them. I just shrugged. Maybe. She walked toward the door, then stopped beside me. You know, she said quietly, Dad really did want to give you something. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, advice. What was it? She smiled again. Stay out of things you don't understand. Then she left. Her heels clicked down the hallway like punctuation. Mr. Halvorsen closed the folder slowly. I'm sorry, he said. For what? He hesitated. Your father could be decisive. That's one word for it. I stood and buttoned my jacket. Is that everything? The lawyer looked like he wanted to say more. But instead he nodded. For now. For now. That phrase would come back later. A lot sooner than anyone in that room expected. The funny thing about money is that it doesn't just move through bank accounts. It moves through paperwork, signatures, corporate structures, old agreements that no one thinks about until suddenly they matter. My father built his empire over 40 years, which meant there were layers. Companies inside companies. Partnerships buried in legal language written back, when fax machines were considered cutting-edge technology. Emily thought she had inherited everything. Technically she had. But technically isn't always the same as complete. I didn't realize how important that distinction was until 3 weeks later. The phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. Unknown number. Daniel Calloway? Speaking. This is Martin Halvorsen. I leaned back in my chair. Something wrong with the paperwork. There was a long pause. Actually, yes. I smiled. Slowly. Let me guess, I said. You need my signature. Silence. Then he sighed. Yes. And that's when I understood something important. My father may have believed I didn't understand business. But business had always understood me. For about 10 seconds after Mr. Halvorsen said he needed my signature, I didn't say anything. Not because I was surprised. Because I wanted to hear how uncomfortable he was about to get. Lawyers hate awkward silence. Their entire profession is built around preventing it. Finally, he cleared his throat. Daniel, there's a document related to the ownership structure of Callaway Development Group that requires your authorization before the estate transfer can be finalized. I leaned back in my chair. My office window looked out over a parking lot in a strip mall. Not exactly the Manhattan skyline, but the rent was cheap and the coffee shop downstairs knew my order. What kind of authorization? Another pause. The board would prefer to discuss it in person. The board. That was interesting. 3 weeks ago, no one wanted to discuss anything with me. Let me guess, I said. Emily's there. Yes. Of course she was. When? Tomorrow morning. I checked the clock. 3:18 p.m. Fine, I said. Same office. Yes. Before he could hang up, I added something. Martin. Yes. You should probably tell Emily something. What's that? I charge for meetings now. He didn't laugh. But he didn't argue either. That night I sat in my apartment with an old cardboard box full of documents. My father had given it to me almost 15 years earlier. Back when I was 28. Back when he still thought I might eventually join the family business. I remembered the moment clearly. We were sitting at his kitchen table. Sunday afternoon. Baseball game on TV. He slid the box across the table. Take these, he said. What are they? Old partnership agreements. Early development contracts. Stuff from the 90s. Why do I need them? He shrugged. Because someday they might matter. At the time I thought it was just another one of his strange tests. He had a lot of those. The let's see if Daniel actually reads boring paperwork test. Turns out, I did. Over the years I had gone through those documents more times than I could count. Part habit. Part curiosity. Part professional instinct. Consulting teaches you something valuable. Important information usually hides in boring places. And one document in that box had always stuck with me. A partnership agreement from 1998. Back when my father was building his first major commercial project in Chicago. Back when he didn't have the capital to do it alone. He had needed investors. And partners. Including someone whose name most people had forgotten. Except me. The next morning the Manhattan office looked exactly the same. Same polished table. Same gray sky. Same expensive silence. Emily was already sitting there when I walked in. She looked annoyed. That was new. Mr. Halvorsen sat beside her with two other men in suits I didn't recognize. Board members probably. Emily folded her arms. You're late. I glanced at my watch.
9:01 a.m.
By 60 seconds. Let's just get this over with, she said.
No greeting. No fake politeness.
Just impatience. I took a seat. Mr. Halvorsen slid a document toward me. This is the final authorization required to complete the transfer of Callaway Development Group to the estate beneficiary. I looked down at the paper. 30 pages. Dense legal language. Corporate restructuring. Ownership consolidation. And right there on page 4 was the thing they hoped I wouldn't notice. But I did. Because I'd seen it before. The clause referenced the 1998 Chicago Development Partnership Agreement. I flipped a few more pages slowly. Interesting, I said. Emily sighed loudly. Can you just sign the damn thing? I looked up. You seem nervous. I'm not nervous. You look nervous. One of the board members shifted in his chair. Mr. Callaway. Daniel, I said. Daniel, he corrected. This is simply a formality required to finalize the estate transfer. Why me? Silence. Emily leaned forward. Because your name is on a legacy partnership clause Dad created decades ago. That's it. I nodded slowly. That's not all it is. The room got quiet. Emily's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I turned the document around and tapped the page. This clause gives the secondary partner veto authority over ownership transfers that affect development assets tied to the Chicago portfolio. One of the board members blinked. You read it. I smiled. Twice. Emily frowned. That's irrelevant. No, I said calmly. It's extremely relevant. I leaned back in my chair. Because if I don't sign this, the ownership transfer can't legally happen. No one spoke. For a moment the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Emily looked at the lawyer. Is that true? Mr. Halvorsen rubbed his forehead. Yes. Her head snapped toward me. You're telling me the entire estate transfer depends on you? Part of it. How much? I flipped another page. Rough estimate? I shrugged. About 60% of the company's development portfolio. Emily stared. That and Appo's impossible. Actually, said one of the board members quietly, it's accurate. The color drained slightly from her face. You never told me about this. Mr. Halvorsen sighed. Your father structured certain projects this way for leverage. Emily turned back to me. So sign it. Why? Her eyes widened. Because it's my company. I tilted my head. That's what you believe. Dad left it to me. Yes. But Dad also signed this agreement. I tapped the page again. And agreements don't disappear just because someone dies. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Which honestly she probably was. 4 years Emily had assumed I lived in the shallow end of the business world. Turns out I'd been swimming in deeper water the whole time. The meeting ended without a signature. I took the document with me. Emily followed me into the hallway. Her heels clicked faster this time. What do you want? I turned. Excuse me. You didn't come here just to stall. She was right about that. I want time. For what? To review everything properly. You've already reviewed it. Not recently. She stepped closer. This isn't a game, Daniel. No, I said. It's business. Her jaw tightened. Dad trusted me to run that company. And he trusted me enough to put my name in the contract. That was 25 years ago. Still valid. She stared at me. You're unbelievable. Maybe. Then I smiled again. But remember something. What? You told me to stay out of things I don't understand. Her expression hardened. So, I shrugged. Looks like I accidentally wandered into one anyway. That afternoon I met someone for lunch. A man named Arthur Bell. Arthur had been my father's corporate attorney in the early days. Before Mr. Halvorsen. Before the skyscrapers. Before the money got big. Arthur was 78 now and mostly retired. But his mind was still sharp enough to cut glass. We sat in a quiet steakhouse in Midtown. He ordered soup. I ordered coffee. I slid the document across the table. He read it slowly. Then he chuckled. That old clause. You remember it? Of course I do. Why did my father create it? Arthur leaned back. Insurance. Against what? Against losing control. Of his own company? Arthur shook his head. No. Of his partners. He tapped the page. The Chicago development deal required 2 signatories. My father. And the junior partner he trusted most. I frowned. Junior partner? Arthur smiled. You. I stared at him. That can't be right. It is. You're saying Dad made me a partner when I was 28? Arthur nodded. You didn't notice the signature block? I thought back to that kitchen table years ago. The cardboard box. The stack of contracts. The place where my father had casually pointed and said, sign here. At the time I thought it was paperwork practice. Apparently it wasn't. How much control does that give me? Arthur folded his hands. If you refuse to authorize the restructuring. Yes. The Chicago portfolio cannot legally transfer to Emily. How much is that worth? Arthur smiled faintly. About $30 million. I let that sink in. $30 million. Hidden in a 25-year-old clause. Did Dad plan this? I asked. Arthur shrugged. Your father planned everything. I looked down at the document again. Then I laughed quietly. What? Arthur asked. I think my sister is about to discover something. What's that? I took a sip of coffee. That the brother she thinks understands nothing about business. I set the cup down. Might be the only person standing between her and half her inheritance. For the next week, Emily called me 12 times. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to be dramatic. Because silence is a very useful negotiation tool. Instead, I spent those 7 days doing something my father would have appreciated, homework. Every contract. Every development asset tied to the Chicago portfolio. Every corporate structure that connected the old partnership agreement to the current company. It took 3 days just to map it all out on a whiteboard in my office. Boxes. Arrows. Ownership percentages. By Wednesday night the wall looked like the investigation board from a detective movie. Only instead of serial killers, the suspects were shell companies. That's the thing about real estate empires. They're not really buildings. They're paperwork. And buried in that paperwork was something interesting. The Chicago portfolio wasn't just valuable. It was essential. Nearly 60% of Callaway Development Group's active loans were secured against those properties. Which meant something very simple. Without my signature, the banks wouldn't finalize the refinancing agreements Emily needed to maintain control of the company. In other words, the empire my father left her sat on top of a legal pressure plate. And I was the only one with the key. On Thursday afternoon I finally called Emily back. She answered immediately. Daniel. Her voice had changed. Less confident. More careful. I was starting to think you'd disappeared, she said. Just working. On what? Reading. That clause again? That and a few other things. A pause. What do you want? Straight to the point. I respected that. I want to meet. When? Tomorrow. Where? Somewhere neutral. Emily exhaled slowly. Fine. We met at a restaurant in Tribeca. The kind of place with dim lighting and quiet conversations that cost $15 for a glass of sparkling water. Emily arrived first. She wore another black outfit. But this time it looked less like confidence and more like armor. I sat across from her. She didn't waste time. Name your price. I smiled. That's not why I'm here. Then why? Because I think we should understand each other. Emily leaned back. I understand perfectly. You're blocking the estate transfer. Yes. Why? Because you told me Dad thought I didn't understand business. She rolled her eyes. Daniel, don't be childish. I'm not. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the loan structures tied to the Chicago developments. Emily skimmed the first page. Her expression tightened. You went through all this? Every page. She flipped another document. You hired someone to help you. A few people. Lawyers. Of course. Emily looked up. You're preparing for a fight. I shook my head. No. What then? A negotiation. Her fingers tapped the folder. You want equity? Not exactly. Money? No. Emily frowned. Then what? I leaned forward slightly. What I want is honesty. She stared at me. That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Then answer one question. What? Did Dad really believe I knew nothing about business? Emily didn't respond immediately. Her eyes moved away from mine. That was the moment I knew. Finally she sighed. No. I sat back. Thought so. She rubbed her temples. You always were good with numbers. And contracts. And strategy, she admitted reluctantly. Then why the line in the will? Emily stared at the table for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Because Dad knew you'd never fight me. That landed harder than I expected. What? He thought if he left everything to me, you'd just walk away. Why would he think that? Emily looked at me. Because you always did. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. She wasn't wrong. Growing up, Emily and I had competed for everything. Attention, approval, success. And whenever things got ugly, I backed off. Not because I was weak. Because I didn't care enough to keep fighting. Emily leaned forward. He didn't leave you out because he thought you were stupid. Then why? Because he trusted you. I laughed quietly. That's a strange way to show it. You're the only person he believed wouldn't destroy the company. That was unexpected. Emily continued. He thought if things ever went wrong, you'd step in. By accident? She nodded toward the folder. Looks like he was right. The waiter arrived with drinks. Neither of us touched them. So what happens now? Emily asked. I folded my hands. Now we fix something. What? The company. She blinked. What are you talking about? I slid one final document across the table. A financial report Arthur had helped me analyze. Emily read the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Her face slowly lost color. This can't be right. It is. No. Yes. She looked up. You're saying the Chicago properties are leveraged at 80%? 83. That's insane. That's aggressive. Emily pushed the paper away. Dad never told me about this. He wouldn't. Why? Because if the market dipped even 10%. She finished the sentence quietly. The company collapses. I nodded. That's the situation you inherited. Emily stared at the table. For the first time since the will reading, she looked genuinely afraid. How bad is it? Bad enough that the banks are already reviewing the loan terms. And without your signature, the restructuring fails. And if that fails? I shrugged. Then Callaway Development Group might not exist next year. The silence between us lasted a long time. Finally, Emily said something I never expected to hear. What do you suggest? Not demand. Not order. Ask. I leaned back. I suggest we do what Dad actually planned. What was that? Run the company together. Emily stared. You're serious? Yes. You want half the company? No. What then? Equal authority. 50-50. I nodded. That's absurd. Is it? You've never worked there. Neither had you before Dad handed you the office. She opened her mouth, then stopped, because she knew I was right. Finally she asked the real question. And if I say no? I smiled again. The same smile I'd worn in the lawyer's office. Then we wait. For what? For the banks to discover what I already did. And then? I lifted my glass. They'll come looking for my signature too. Emily stared at me across the table. For the first time in our lives, the balance between us had changed. Not dramatically, Not violently. Just enough. Finally she exhaled. You planned this? No, I said calmly. Dad did. She looked down at the documents again. Then she laughed once. Short and dark. You know what the worst part is? What? He probably knew this exact conversation would happen. Probably. Emily closed the folder. Then she looked up at me. All right. I raised an eyebrow. All right, what? We try it your way. I nodded slowly. Good. But understand something, Daniel. What's that? If this goes wrong. I finished the sentence for her. We both lose everything. Emily held my gaze. Yes. And for the first time since the will reading, we were finally playing the same game. The strange thing about revenge is that it rarely looks the way you imagined. For most people, revenge means explosions, screaming matches, dramatic confrontations in expensive offices. For me, it meant spreadsheets. Lots of them. 3 days after my dinner with Emily, we met again. This time in the Callaway Development Group headquarters. I hadn't been inside that building in almost 8 years. Glass walls, marble floors, a lobby that smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. When I walked in, the receptionist looked confused. Can I help you? Yes, I said. I believe I work here now. Technically, that wasn't even a joke.
Emily met me upstairs.
Her office overlooked the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of view that makes people feel powerful even when they're not. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Seat. Iset. She slid a thick folder toward me. I've reviewed your proposal. And I hate it. Good. Emily stared at me. That wasn't a compliment. I know. Inside the folder was a revised corporate structure we'd spent 2 days drafting with Arthur, and a new legal team. It did 3 things. First, it activated the old partnership clause, formally recognizing me as a controlling development partner in the Chicago portfolio. Second, it restructured the company board to include 2 additional independent directors. Third, and most importantly, it removed unilateral authority from the CEO position, which meant Emily could no longer run the company alone. Neither could I. We were stuck together. Exactly the way my father apparently intended. Emily tapped the folder. You realize this gives you enormous leverage. That's the point. And it cuts my authority in half. Also the point. She leaned back in her chair and studied me. You've changed. No. Yes, you have. How? You're calm. I was always calm. Not like this. She tilted her head slightly. Before you avoided conflict. And now you walk straight into it. I thought about that for a moment. Maybe I just stopped leaving. Emily didn't respond. Instead, she opened another file. The banks are requesting a restructuring meeting next week. I expected that. They're nervous. They should be. Emily gave me a long look. You're enjoying this? A little. At least I was honest. The meeting with the banks happened the following Wednesday. 5 people from 2 major lenders sat across the conference table. Serious faces. Expensive suits. Calculators hidden behind polite smiles. They had questions. Lots of them. Why was the Chicago portfolio suddenly under joint authority? Why had the corporate structure changed? Why had the board expanded? Emily handled the first half of the meeting. She spoke confidently about long-term development strategies and market stabilization. Then one of the bankers turned to me. Mr. Callaway, you're listed as the senior development partner in the Chicago agreements. That's new to us. It's actually 25 years old. He blinked. I see. Most people don't. He glanced at the financial reports. Our concern is leverage. Yes. The loan exposure tied to those properties is significant. Yes. And if the market softens? It won't, I said. The banker paused. I'm prepared. How? I slid a document across the table. Because we're refinancing the portfolio through a staggered asset release. He studied the page. Emily watched me carefully. We've already secured preliminary interest from 2 additional lenders. I continued. And if they agree? The exposure drops from 83% to 45%. The room got quiet. One banker leaned forward. That would stabilize the entire company. That's the idea. Emily folded her arms. She had seen this plan before, but hearing it explained out loud was different. It sounded real. The banker looked up. When did you prepare this? I shrugged. Last week. Emily let out a soft laugh under her breath. Of course you did. By the time the meeting ended, the banks were satisfied enough to delay any aggressive action, which in the financial world counts as a victory. After everyone left the conference room, Emily and I stayed behind. She stood by the window looking out at the river. I hate to admit it, she said, but you saved the company today. Not yet. You know what I mean. I did. Emily turned toward me. You also humiliated me. That wasn't the goal. But it happened. Yes. She sighed. I spent 10 years building my reputation here. And you're still in charge. Not really. Shared authority. She smiled faintly. Which you control. Only when necessary. Emily walked back to the table. You know what's funny? What? 3 weeks ago I thought you were irrelevant. And now? Now the entire company runs through a contract you signed before you owned a decent pair of shoes. I chuckled. That was a good pair of shoes. No, it wasn't. She sat down across from me again. So what happens next? Next we rebuild the portfolio properly. And if we succeed, then the company grows. And if we fail, then we both lose $50 million. Emily nodded slowly. I suppose that's motivating. Over the next 2 months something strange happened. Emily and I started working well together. Not perfectly. We argued constantly. About investments. About expansion plans. About whether the coffee in the executive kitchen was terrible. It was. But the company stabilized. The refinancing deal closed. 2 underperforming developments were sold. New projects started in Denver and Austin. And gradually the quiet panic inside the company faded. Employees noticed. Investors noticed. Even the board noticed. One afternoon Arthur visited the office. He watched Emily and me debate a construction timeline for 15 minutes. Then he laughed. What? Emily asked. You two sound exactly like your father. God help us, she said. Arthur shook his head. No, it's a compliment. He looked at me. He always said the two of you would be unstoppable if you ever stopped competing. Emily raised an eyebrow. Did he really say that? Arthur nodded. Constantly. She looked at me. Well. I shrugged. Better late than never. A week later I found something unexpected in my mailbox. An envelope addressed in my father's handwriting. Inside was a short letter. No legal language. No instructions. Just a few lines written in blue ink. Daniel, if you're reading this, the will has already caused a mess. That was unavoidable. Emily is brilliant, but she believes control is the same as strength. You understand something she doesn't yet. Restraint. Between the two of you, the company survives. Separately, it doesn't. Don't let pride destroy what took 40 years to build. Dad. I read the letter twice. Then folded it carefully. My father had always loved complicated solutions. Apparently, even death hadn't stopped him. 3 months after the will reading, the story finally reached the newspapers. Not the dramatic version people usually imagine. There were no headlines about family feuds or inheritance wars. Just a quiet business article buried in the financial section. Callaway Development Group announces strategic leadership restructure. Emily was listed as CEO. I was listed as managing development partner. Equal authority. Shared control. Anyone reading it would assume that had always been the plan. Which, in a strange way, it had been. Life settled into something almost normal after that. Mornings started early. Coffee. Email. Construction reports. Emily handled investor relations and corporate strategy. I handled development operations, financing structures, and the projects themselves. It was an odd partnership. She was fast and aggressive. I was slow and careful. She liked big risks. I preferred quiet advantages buried in contracts. But together it worked. Not perfectly, but well enough that the company stabilized faster than anyone expected. 6 months after the restructuring, the Chicago properties were refinancing smoothly. The Denver project broke ground. And the Austin development sold half its commercial space before construction even finished. Even the board stopped looking nervous. which is how you know things are improving in business. When the people in expensive suits stop whispering in hallways. Emily and I still argued. A lot. One afternoon she burst into my office holding a report. This is ridiculous. What is? You're turning down the Phoenix project. Yes. It's $100 million opportunity. It's $100 million risk. That's the point. No, I said calmly. The point is surviving long enough to enjoy the profits. She dropped the folder onto my desk. You're cautious to the point of insanity. And you're aggressive to the point of self-destruction. Emily stared at me for a few seconds. Then she laughed. You know what's strange? What? I used to think Dad favored you. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Yes. Why? Because he never pushed you the way he pushed me. She sat down in the chair across from my desk. I thought that meant he trusted you more. And now I think he was just waiting. For what? For you to show up. I considered that. Better late than never. Exactly. About a year after my father's death, Emily and I visited his grave. Not together at first. That would have been too organized for our family. I arrived early on a quiet Sunday morning. The cemetery sat on a hill outside the city. Wind moved slowly through the trees. My father's name was carved into a simple stone. Richard Calloway. 1949 to 2025. 40 years building an empire. And apparently one final year designing the ultimate business strategy. Emily showed up 20 minutes later. She stood beside me without speaking for a while. Finally she said, You know he manipulated us. Yes. Completely. Yes. And we walked straight into it. I nodded. That was the plan. Emily folded her arms. Do you think he knew it would work? I looked at the stone. My father believed two things about people. What? First, that most people reveal their true character when money is involved. And second, that family fights harder than business partners. Emily considered that. Well, she said. He wasn't wrong. Revenge is a strange word. People imagine it as something explosive. But the truth is, the best revenge is usually quiet. Cold. Strategic. When I walked out of that lawyer's office the day the will was read, my sister believed she had everything. $50 million. Total control of the company. My father's approval. What she didn't realize was that none of those things meant anything without the one element she didn't have. Leverage. And leverage rarely looks dramatic. Sometimes it's just a forgotten clause in a 25-year-old contract. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's knowing when to stay silent long enough for other people to reveal their mistakes. I could have destroyed the company if I wanted. Refused the signature. Let the banks dismantle everything. Technically, that would have been revenge. But revenge that destroys everything usually leaves you standing alone in the ruins. That didn't interest me. Instead, I chose something more useful. Control without chaos. Power without noise. And the quiet satisfaction of watching someone realize they underestimated you. A few weeks ago, Emily and I had dinner with the board. After the meeting, one of the directors pulled me aside. I have to ask, he said. What? Did you know about the partnership clause before the will reading? I smiled. Yes. You planned everything? No. Then why did you smile in that lawyer's office? Because I remembered something my father once told me when I was a teenager. We were standing at a construction site in Chicago. Steel beams rising into the sky. He looked down at the half-finished building and said, People think business is about money. I asked him what it was really about. He pointed to the foundation. Structure. Then he looked at me and smiled. If the structure is right, everything else eventually falls into place. So when my sister laughed and told me I didn't understand business, I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. The structure had already been built. And sooner or later, everyone would have to stand on it.